it's story time with Mrs. Beth again. I hope you're having a good day. I am so far. You know what? I have a story today about a tractor. So this story is a shout out to all my friends who know somebody that drives a tractor, or maybe you used to live on a farm when you were little, or maybe you do live on a farm now, or maybe your grandparents do. Anyway, this story is called Otis and the Kittens. Let's read it together. Otis and the Kittens. It was hot and dry on the farm where the friendly little tractor named Otis lived. Otis couldn't remember the last time it had rained. Farmers all over the valley grew more anxious by the day. Water was in short supply, the ground was hard, and the corn stalks were half as tall as they should have been. Otis spent his afternoons out in the sweltering fields with the farmhands baling straw. Once the load was full, with a puff and a chuff, Otis would pull the wagon into the old barn down by the bend at Mud Creek. The farmhands would use a pulley to lift each bale up into the loft, where it would be stored for the long winter to come. When the sun had gone over the hill and work was done, Otis was ready to sit in the shade and rest. But not Otis's friend, the bull. The bull liked to stand in front of Otis and snort and snarl and huff hot air. 2 snorts, a snarl, and a huff. All the animals knew what that meant. The bull was challenging Otis to a tug of war. Otis smiled. His friends were always eager to play, even after a long day of work. One duck would wound the end of a rope around the bull's horn. Another duck looped the other end around Otis's steering wheel. The animals then took sides, grabbing on any way they could. Everyone pulled and tugged with all their might. Eventually, Otis would ease up a little. He didn't care much about winning. He just liked having fun with his friends. One afternoon, when everyone was up under the shade of an apple tree, Otis spotted something moving down in the field. It looked to be an orange tabby cat. Where did she come from? Otis wondered. He watched as she ran towards the old barn, and there he saw something that caused his engine to sputter, a swirl of smoke. Otis raced to the barn with the animals following behind. They discovered flames coming from the loft inside the old barn. A fire! The barn was filled with brittle, dry straw, and Otis knew it wouldn't take long for it all to burst into flames. Just then, the tabby cat appeared in the barn window. With a put-put, puffity-puffity chug, Otis rushed into the burning barn. Inside, the flames were growing and smoke was forming a dark cloud. The cat was pacing back and forth high above on a rafter. Otis chugged, chuff, chuff, chuffed for her to come down, but the cat wouldn't budge. Instead, she stared down at Otis and belted out the loudest meow Otis had ever heard. What was she trying to tell him? Suddenly, Otis heard a tiny meow from the hayloft, and then another tiny meow, and another, and another, and another. At once, 5 furry little heads popped up and stared down at him. Kittens! As flames blazed overhead, Otis stood on his hind wheels and stretched to the edge of the loft. A whole bunch of meows, meows, one by one, the kittens hopped down. The farm animals cheered as Otis emerged from the burning barn with kittens all over him. But as soon as the mama cat counted their little heads, she meowed frantically back at the barn. Meow, meow, meow. This time, Otis had no doubt what she was saying. How many more were still in there, he wondered. By then, the top of the barn was engulfed in flames, sending large bits of smoke into the sky. Otis was afraid, but he gunned up his engine, screeched his tires, and dashed back into the burning barn. Inside, the heat was growing worse and it was hard to breathe. Otis revved his engine, and one last little head popped up, trembling with fear. Otis puffed a gentle chuff, chuff, and the kitten climbed down on top of him, hopped to his seat, leaped to the floor, and hurried out of the barn to safety. Outside, the animals cheered when they saw another kitten emerge, and they watched and waited for Otis to follow. Inside, the flames spread really fast. Otis wheeled around to see if any more kittens were left. The old boards of the barn's floor creaked and buckled and moaned. The walls popped. He couldn't wait another second. He had to hurry and get out. Just as Otis spotted the exit and raced his wheels to leave, there was a giant crash. The floor collapsed and Otis plunged to the darkness below. Uh-oh. Outside, the animals held their breath, waiting for their friend to emerge. Inside, Otis couldn't move. He had fallen into the cluttered lower level of the old barn, and it was covered in dust, debris, and broken planks of wood. Stuck in the hole with the fire raging above, Otis could hardly puff a breath. Then he heard the siren of Fire Chief Douglas and the fire engine. The farmer pulled up, and Otis heard him rounding up the animals. Help had arrived. He knew he'd be fine until he heard Fire Chief Douglas holler something. Sorry, farmer, the creek's gone dry in the drought and the water supply's too low to save this old barn. As long as everyone's safe, we'll have to let it burn. Underneath the pile of broken boards and dust, Otis couldn't see a thing or even move, and his heart sank deep inside his engine. Oh no, they were going to let it burn, and he was stuck down in there. The animals had grown wild with fear. The farmer counted them one by one. They were all safe and sound. He couldn't figure out why they were acting so crazy. Suddenly, the little calf bolted for the barn door. Her friends followed right behind. Inside the fiery barn, they spotted Otis stuck down in the hole, covered in boards and dust. His engine was barely running. How could they ever get him out? The bull looked up at the rafters, and he looked down at Otis. He stood in front of the hole in the floor and snorted and snarled and huffed hot air. Two snorts, a snarl, and a huff. The animals knew just what that meant. One duck grabbed the pulley rope and wound it around the bull's horn. Another duck flew into the hole and hooked it on Otis's steering wheel. The bull snorted and tugged and snarled and pulled. But Otis didn't budge. He didn't move. The horse and the cow grabbed the rope behind the bull, and together they snorted and tugged and neighed and mooed and pulled, and Otis teetered ever so slightly hanging there. The little calf jumped in and tugged and pulled, and Otis raised a bit more. The puppy grabbed the rope behind the little calf with a fierce arf, 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 tugged and pulled and growled as Otis inched upward. Is he coming? And then came a piercing meow and the sound of a Fire Chief Douglas shouting, "Holy moly! Otis is in there! Hold on tight, everyone! I'm here to help!" Fire Chief Douglas grabbed the end of the rope and tugged and pulled and tugged. All together, the animals and the Fire Chief Douglas lifted Otis higher and higher until he was suspended above the hole. The ducks swooped in and pushed him over the edge of the opening to where they could lower him to the floor. Together, everyone pulled the dust and ash-covered tractor out from the burning fire just as parts of the barn began to fall. Then Fire Chief Douglas and his men hosed off Otis and wiped him down. The cool water revived Otis, and everyone cheered when they heard a faint puff, puff, puffity chuff. It was music to their ears. The kittens jumped up on top of Otis and crawled all over him. Fire Chief Douglas laughed and said, "Farmer, what say we adopt these kittens and their mama? They'd make a mighty fine addition to our firehouse family." Otis puffed a happy chuff, chuff. He couldn't think of a better home for his new friends. The end. What a sweet story. Otis was a great tractor and helped those kittens and all his friends. And then also the firefighter Douglas. They all helped Otis get out of that burning barn. I hope you have fun with your friends. And if you have a kitten, give it a cute little cuddle. See you next time, my friends.